The Second World War really changed the skies over Europe. Suddenly they became a vast, and very dangerous, battleground. Planes from both the Allied and Axis sides were constantly flying back and forth, often on long risky journeys. For the air crews, every mission was full of uncertainty. Mechanical problems, enemy attacks, and unpredictable weather could turn any flight into a fight for survival. Now, Ireland was officially neutral and far away from the main action. On the surface, it seemed like an unlikely place for any of this drama to play out. But because Ireland sits right on the western edge of Europe, it quietly became a witness to the conflict happening above. As bombers and fighters made their way across the tricky North Atlantic, Ireland's green fields and rugged coastlines sometimes became unexpected lifelines. Pilots who were lost or whose planes were damaged often had no choice but to land on Irish soil. These landings were rarely planned. They were desperate, last-minute decisions that brought the global war right to Ireland's doorstep. Imagine it, the peaceful Irish countryside, usually so quiet and remote, suddenly hosting some of the world's most advanced warplanes and their exhausted crews. For many people living there, seeing a foreign plane coming down from the clouds was both exciting and a little frightening. During those years, the skies over Ireland became a crossroads for nations at war. Every emergency landing told its own story, of survival, of luck, and of the strange ways neutrality and conflict can overlap. The presence of these planes and their crews challenged Ireland's policies, tested its neutrality, and created stories that people still remember today. In the end, those wartime skies, once something distant and abstract, became deeply connected to the lives of ordinary Irish people. Ireland's neutrality was respected, yes, but it was also quietly breached, one emergency landing at a time. During World War II, Ireland took a very clear stance: strict neutrality. At home, this policy was known as the emergency. The government, led by Éamon de Valera, was absolutely determined to keep Ireland out of the conflict that was tearing Europe apart. For them, neutrality wasn't just a political choice, it was about survival. The country was still healing from its own recent fight for independence, and the idea of being pulled into another devastating war, especially one involving their powerful neighbor Britain, was something most Irish people wanted to avoid at all costs. But even with all this caution, the realities of war were never too far away. Ireland's location, so close to Britain and right beside the busy Atlantic shipping lanes, meant that the country was always at risk of being caught up in the fighting, even if by accident. To try and keep things under control, the government put strict rules in place. They controlled information, limited movement, and carefully managed resources, all in an effort to keep the country balanced on a very thin line. Still, the war had a way of finding its way in. Every time a foreign aircraft, sometimes Allied, sometimes Axis, landed unexpectedly, it created a whole new set of challenges. Each landing was a real test of Ireland's commitment to neutrality and its ability to stick to its own laws. By international law, whenever a foreign plane landed, Irish authorities were supposed to intern the crew for the rest of the war. This was meant to make sure Ireland didn't become a base for either side. But in reality, things were rarely that straightforward. Local communities, often curious and sometimes even sympathetic, would gather to watch these surprise arrivals. Meanwhile, the government had to figure out how to handle each situation without upsetting either side. As it turned out, being neutral wasn't always as simple as it sounded. The stories of crash landings in Ireland during World War II are just as varied as the planes themselves. Some aircraft came down in dramatic fashion. Engines sputtering, wings battered from battle, the crews doing everything they could just to stay in the air. Others managed more controlled landings, thanks to skilled pilots who were desperate to save their crews and themselves. The reasons for these unexpected arrivals were many. Sometimes it was a navigational mistake, other times a fuel shortage, a mechanical failure, or simply the chaos and confusion of war. Each incident brought its own mix of danger, relief, and confusion to the quiet Irish countryside. One of the most famous stories is about a B-17 Flying Fortress that landed in Clonbullig, County Offaly. The American crew, lost and running low on fuel, had no real choice but to bring their huge bomber down in a farmer's field. You can imagine the scene: local residents rushing out, both amazed and a little nervous at the sight of this giant plane sitting in the middle of their land. The crew, just grateful to be alive, were quickly taken into custody by Irish authorities. Stories like this played out all over the country, from remote bogs to windswept coastal meadows, each one with its own cast of characters and its own bit of drama. Of course, not every landing had a happy ending. Some planes crashed in rough terrain, leading to injuries or even loss of life. Irish emergency services, who weren't really prepared for these kinds of events, did their best to help. Local doctors, nurses and volunteers often stepped in, playing vital roles in rescuing and caring for survivors. These incidents, though rare, left a deep mark on the communities involved. The crash landings of World War II became part of local folklore, stories remembered for their drama, and for the way global events suddenly touched everyday Irish life. For many people in Ireland, seeing a foreign aircraft land nearby was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. News of a crash or emergency landing would spread like wildfire, and before long, crowds from nearby villages and farms would gather at the scene. Both children and adults would rush out, eager to get a look at these strange machines, and the even stranger crews who flew them. Imagine the excitement and disbelief of spotting a massive B-17 or a Luftwaffe bomber sitting in the middle of a quiet Irish field. It was thrilling, a little surreal, and a stark reminder that the world's troubles weren't as far away as they might have hoped. People's reactions were all over the map. Some locals were quick to help, bringing food, blankets, or first aid to the stranded airmen. Others were more cautious, not quite sure if they should get involved in something that might have international consequences. The arrival of armed Irish soldiers or police only added to the sense of drama and uncertainty. Sometimes, language barriers and cultural differences led to confusion, or even a bit of humor. There are plenty of stories about American or German airmen trying to communicate with their Irish hosts, often with mixed and sometimes comical results. But beneath all the excitement, there was also a sense of anxiety. The government's policy of interning foreign airmen meant that even offering help could be seen as a political act. Some communities worried about drawing unwanted attention from the authorities, or from the countries at war. Still, more often than not, the basic human instinct to help someone in need won out. The way local people responded to these unexpected landings really showed the resilience and hospitality of the Irish, even in the most uncertain of times. According to international law, Ireland had to intern any military personnel from countries at war who ended up on Irish soil. This rule was meant to make sure Ireland didn't become a base for either side in the conflict. To handle this, the government set up internment camps, the most famous being the Chronicle camp, often called the K-lines. It was here that both Allied and Axis airmen were held for the duration of the war, creating a community that was, at times, both unique and a little bit bizarre. Life inside these camps was full of contrast. The Irish authorities, determined to stay neutral, enforced the rules but also allowed the internees a surprising amount of freedom. The men could organize sports, put on cultural events, and even go on supervised excursions outside the camp. Allied and Axis prisoners were kept in separate sections, but there are plenty of stories about interactions, and even friendships, forming across the divide. In many ways, the camp became a tiny version of the wider war, with its own routines, tensions, and moments of unexpected camaraderie. For the airmen, being interned was a mixed bag. On one hand, they were safe from the dangers of combat. On the other, they were cut off from their comrades and families, which could be deeply frustrating. Some tried to escape, hoping to get back to the fight, while others simply settled into the rhythms of camp life. The Irish Guards, often sympathetic, sometimes looked the other way when it came to minor rule-breaking. The internment camps of wartime Ireland remain a fascinating footnote in history, a place where enemies lived side by side, forced into a kind of peace by circumstance. Most of the aircraft that landed in Ireland during World War II actually belonged to the Allied forces, mainly the British Royal Air Force and the United States Army Air Forces. These landings usually happened because of navigational mistakes, bad weather, or damage from missions over Europe. For the crews, Ireland was often their last hope, a neutral country where they might find safety, even if it meant being interned for the rest of the war. When Allied airmen arrived, there was usually a mix of relief at having survived and disappointment at being out of the fight. Irish authorities followed the official rules of neutrality when dealing with Allied crews, but there was often a quiet sense of sympathy. Many Irish families had relatives serving in the British or American forces, and the cultural connections ran deep. In some cases, Allied airmen were even quietly allowed to escape across the border into Northern Ireland, where they could rejoin their units. These unofficial arrangements were something of an open secret, tolerated by the government as long as they didn't draw too much attention. The stories of Allied arrivals are full of kindness and clever solutions. Local communities often went out of their way to help the stranded airmen, offering food, shelter, and sometimes even directions to help them on their way. The airmen, for their part, left a lasting impression on the places where they landed. Some even returned after the war to thank their Irish hosts, and friendships were formed that lasted for decades. The arrival of Allied crews in Ireland was a powerful reminder that, even in the middle of a world at war, simple acts of humanity could rise above politics. While most of the unexpected landings in Ireland involved Allied aircraft, there were also a number of German Luftwaffe planes that found their way to Irish soil. These incidents usually happened because of navigational mistakes or mechanical problems, as German crews tried to make their way home after missions over Britain. The arrival of Axis airmen brought a different set of challenges for the Irish authorities, who had to carefully balance their policy of neutrality with the realities of a world at war. German airmen were interned right alongside their Allied counterparts, but the atmosphere was often a bit more tense. The Irish government was very careful not to show any favoritism, knowing that both sides were paying close attention to how these situations were handled. Sometimes, German crews were met with suspicion or even hostility from local communities, who worried about possible reprisals or attracting unwanted attention. Still, there were also stories of kindness and even friendship, as ordinary people stepped in to help those in need, regardless of which side they were on. The presence of Axis airmen in Ireland was a constant reminder of just how delicate the country's position really was. The government had to walk a very fine line, making sure its neutrality was respected, but also doing everything possible to avoid provoking either side. The stories of these Axis arrivals aren't as well known, but they offer a fascinating glimpse into the complexities of wartime Ireland. Even though these incidents were rare, they added yet another layer to Ireland's unique experience during the Second World War. The emergency landings during World War II brought together people from completely different worlds, creating unexpected moments of connection and understanding right in the middle of all the chaos. Imagine Irish farmers and villagers suddenly coming face to face with American, British, or German airmen, often with hardly any shared language or background. These encounters could be awkward, sometimes even funny, but they were always unforgettable. For a brief moment, the distant war became something very real and personal. There are so many stories of local hospitality and generosity that have survived from those days. Irish families would take in stranded airmen, offering them food, a warm place to stay, and a bit of normal life. In return, the airmen would share their own stories, give small gifts, and sometimes even bring a bit of music or dancing into the home. These simple, human moments broke down barriers and left lasting memories on both sides. For the airmen, Ireland became a place of unexpected kindness in a world turned upside down by war. For the Irish, these visitors were a living reminder of the wider world and its struggles. Of course, not every encounter was easy. There were misunderstandings, cultural clashes, and moments of real fear. But overall, what stands out is how humanity managed to shine through, even in the darkest times. The emergency landings of World War II created a unique space for connection, where, just for a little while, enemies could become friends. These stories are a powerful testament to the resilience and compassion of ordinary people, finding common ground in the most extraordinary circumstances. Today, the stories of World War II's emergency landings in Ireland are remembered and celebrated in all sorts of ways. Local historians and enthusiasts have worked hard to keep these memories alive, gathering old photographs, documents, and personal stories from those who were there. Museums and exhibitions now showcase the aircraft, uniforms, and artifacts left behind by the airmen, giving visitors a real sense of what those days were like. Every year, commemorations bring together descendants, veterans, and community members to honor the legacy of those who landed, sometimes unexpectedly, on Irish soil. These stories haven't just stayed in the past either. They've inspired writers, filmmakers, and artists, who are drawn to the drama and humanity of these landings. You'll find novels, documentaries, and plays that bring to life the tales of surprise arrivals, daring escapes, and unlikely friendships. Even now, these stories continue to capture the imagination of new generations, keeping the memory of those extraordinary times alive and vibrant. But these remembered stories are much more than just interesting bits of history. They're a testament to the resilience, compassion, and adaptability of ordinary people faced with extraordinary circumstances. As Ireland continues to reflect on its role during the Second World War, these stories offer important lessons about neutrality, about hospitality, and about the enduring bonds of humanity that can form even in the most unexpected moments. The legacy of World War II's emergency landings in Ireland is still felt today. Most of the aircraft that came down have long since vanished, either reclaimed by the land or carefully preserved in museums. But the stories of those landings are very much alive, passed down through families and remembered in local communities. In some places, monuments and plaques mark the sites of the most famous incidents, serving as quiet reminders of a time when the world's conflict reached even the most remote corners of Ireland. The impact of these events went far beyond the local level. Dealing with foreign airmen gave Ireland valuable experience in handling neutrality and international law. The way the government managed these landings was watched closely by both the Allies and the Axis, and it influenced Ireland's diplomatic relationships for years afterward. The stories of kindness and cooperation that came out of these encounters also helped build Ireland's reputation as a place of refuge and hospitality. For the communities involved, these landings were truly transformative. They brought the wider world right to Ireland's doorstep, creating connections and memories that lasted long after the war was over. The legacy of these emergency landings is a powerful reminder of how global events can shape local lives, and of the enduring strength of human connection, even in the midst of crisis.
Step into the past and uncover the heart of Ireland. At Emerald Chronicle, we bring you hundreds of captivating documentaries exploring Irish history, myths, legends, and folklore. Our playlists guide you through Ireland's fascinating journey, from prehistoric Ireland, proto-historic and Celtic eras, and the early Christian and Viking periods, to the Anglo-Irish invasion and the lordship of Ireland.
Delve deeper into the Tudor conquest and religious conflicts, the union with Great Britain and the Great Famine, the fight for independence and the divisions of the 20th century, and Ireland's evolution into the 21st century. Best of all, we keep all our documentaries at 15 minutes or less, making it easy to explore Ireland's history, even on a busy day.
Every time you watch, you're supporting the upkeep of our channel. And when you share Emerald Chronicle, you're helping to promote Irish history and culture worldwide. We kindly ask you to like and share, and subscribe to Emerald Chronicle now. Let's keep Ireland's stories alive together.